Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Well, the original plan for this Christmas week was to run a bunch of syndicated shows in this hour. Then I went out into the old newsroom looking for one thing, stumbled onto another. I accidentally discovered a bunch of old cassettes from the 1980s of old newsmakers with Kevin Doran. I thought, wouldn't that be neat to run these this week? And with all of Russia so much in the news in the year 2017, isn't this the perfect topic? It starts out talking about Ireland, but really they get into Russia more. Segment one here is the late Alfred University professor Dr. Savo Jevremovic. In segment two, a Russian immigrant to America, Ed Lozansky. Okay, this is June 1st, 1984, Kevin Doran and Savo.
Now, President Reagan in about 20 minutes will be boarding a jet, Savo, and heading for Ireland. He's going to be greeted in some parts of Ireland, apparently, by demonstrators. Demonstrations will be, in some cases, by sisters, Catholic sisters, some of whom subscribe to a Marxist philosophy known as liberation theology. And when you look at all this happening, you say, whatever happened to the people who wore black hats and white hats so we could tell who was who? It really is confusing today, isn't it?
It most certainly is. The one thing they see about him is essentially his very firm stand versus the Soviet Union and, of course, the placement of the missiles in Europe. And what makes me very, very nervous is that more and more of the West Europeans, are essentially coming to a point where they, share this philosophy, better red than dead, basically afraid that we might provoke the Soviet Union, World War III might start, and of course they see their own homelands as the next battlefield, or at least next target for nuclear weapons.
That's really it, isn't it? Better red than dead. They really have gotten to the point now where they figure, well, the Russians are coming. The question is, are we going to try to stop them? And if we do, we're liable to lose our lives in the process. That's really what it's down to, isn't it?
Well, especially take a look at West Germany. I mean, here's a country that, if you ask yourself, who are the West Germans? Well, half of them are essentially refugees from East Germany. I mean, these are the people who decided they don't want to live in a communist country and at great risk to their own personal safety and lives have crossed the walls and went through barbed wires, minefields and what have you to get into West Germany, to live in a capitalist society. And now we see it is in that country where that movement appears to be very, very strong.
Is it very strong, or is it because a small group can make a lot of noise?
Probably you're right. I mean, there's no doubt.
I don't know if I'm right. I'm asking.
Well, I think you are, because we've seen the last election, and let's say that one political party, the so-called Greens, a group that combines essentially a pacifist stand with a environmental protection stand, did not receive that many votes. So there aren't really that many, but you most certainly hear about them.
Well, the same thing will happen in Ireland. If there are any demonstrations against Reagan in the next 4 days, we'll certainly read about and see that on television. On the other hand, the millions who go out and cheer him, that'll be sort of expected. So I suppose the minorities always will have the ability to make a lot more noise if they're organized.
Well, organized groups of any sort always make more noise. There's no doubt about that. Now, the different leftist groups have been I guess at first willing to go out into the streets and demonstrate and clash with police forces, assume a certain amount of risks and so on. The others, right, who, do not share these views are not willing to do that.
Whittaker Chambers, who recently was given posthumously the American Freedom Medal, once said that when he switched from being a communist to a non-communist, that he was going from the winning to the losing side. This was back in the 30s. Do you think that you are on the losing side, Savo?
Well, I most certainly don't like to think that way, but every so often that thought does go through my mind. I really see the, let's say, shall I in quotes, communist-affiliated groups in many parts of the world, especially Central America, South America, most African countries, and quite a few Asian countries, are succeeding in attracting enough attention and enough support, and somehow the other side has very little to offer them. I mean, it's not giving them an alternative. It's not even trying to give them an alternative. That is what bothers me.
Well, Savo, that would all make a lot of sense, I suppose, except for one thing: the boat people and the Berlin Wall and the murder of about half of all the people who live in Cambodia. When the communists take over, two things always, there are no exceptions. There's a mass exodus from the country, and those who are left, many of them are murdered. Many are imprisoned as they try to establish order. Why would people actively go out and try to bring that kind of a system onto themselves?
Well, that's a question that really has been perplexing me for many, many years, I can assure you.
Why do they do it? I don't comprehend it.
Well, my feeling is that usually, the communist groups succeed in countries where there are serious problems. And it's an environment where people just want a change. And I don't think they're very rational. Basically, what they're looking for is to essentially destroy what exists. And do not ask the question, really, how are we going to replace it? With what are we going to replace it? Their basic question is, how are we going to destroy it? In other words, I see a negative approach there, and there's a lack of a positive solution. Now, of course, the communists they know what they want to put in once they get into power. They know what they're going to substitute for the previous regime's economic and social systems. But most of the other people who wind up supporting them and all that are primarily opposed to what exists and are essentially willing to just destroy it.
Replace it with anything. In our own country, many of the people who are have been traditionally agents of communism, either by the fact that they've been traitors or because they've offered sympathy to the communists. They very often come from the upper classes or the well-educated classes, and therefore, by the nature of our economic system, because they are well-educated, generally well-paid. And they seem to be the ones who would have the most to lose if communism took over. Well, how do you account for that again?
Well, this is another fact. It's true. It's true not just it's true in all of the Western countries, right? Western Europe as well in North America, and. Again, I think what it is these are the people who have plenty of leisure time, who have time to sit and essentially look at what's wrong with the society they live in. And let's face it, you can always find something wrong with any society anywhere in the world, and start formulating some, ideas about replacing with some sort of utopia. But then eventually they get to a point and realize that who has, the means, who's willing to do something about replacing the existing system with something, and then you turn to essentially the communists.
Okay, again, though, I hate to keep coming back to the same thing, but even a casual reading of history, for example, if you're down in a classroom in Nicaragua, you may be a communist today, but certainly if you read any textbooks at all, or even bothered to pick up a magazine from time to time, you would know that wherever they move in, things get worse economically.
Well, you probably could figure it out even without reading history, asking yourself simply the question as to, all right, now supposing we expropriate all those who have some means, right, as Marx put it, take away all the means of production or capital from the private owners, and then divide it among whatever the number of millions of people they have, they can realize that really the improvement in their material welfare, in their standard of living and so on, cannot possibly be very great. I mean, you can sit down and figure that out. But most people really don't approach it in a very rational way. They're just mad that somebody has more than they have. They see themselves living in that misery and somebody else living in luxury, and it upsets them.
So they're willing to give up whatever they've got in order to make sure the other fellow gives up what he's got.
Yes.
Now, I do find it rather perplexing that people would willingly embrace that kind of a system, which I think has been demonstrated does not work economically, politically is extremely difficult to live in. You wonder why they do it.
Well, I mean, you take a look at the Soviet Union right now has very, very serious economic problems. There is no doubt about that. We know that the previous president talked about it. The President Chernenko doesn't talk about it too much. That he's not willing, I guess, to undertake major reforms. But there's no doubt that the Soviet economy is being stretched to its utmost limits.
Savo Jevremovic is our guest this morning. It's 10 minutes before 9. We'll be right back.
Okay, going to take a quick break here on the Newsmaker Show. We're listening to an old Kevin Doran show from June 1st, 1984. A lot of interesting observations from Kevin and his great guest there, the late Dr. Savo Jevremovic. All I can think as I'm listening to them talk about communists and revolutionaries in other countries and protesters against Reagan is the Antifa March and what KPD, as we used to call them around the studio, and around the office, what KPD would have said about Antifa. Going to take a quick break. Stay with us.
Why pay for new when you can get a late model car and save thousands of dollars? Have you checked out the lot at Canisteo Auto Mart recently? They have cars. Outstanding used cars at low prices. And when you buy a vehicle from Canisteo Auto Mart, you can rest assured they'll take care of it for you. They have a complete service department you can buy with confidence at Canisteo Auto Mart because you know they back up their sales with service. Canisteo Auto Mart has many cars suitable for students. Many still have factory warranty miles left on them. So why pay for new when a used car from Canisteo Auto Mart can save you thousands? Thousands! And the car or truck you drive will be just like new. Want reliable wheels under your family or college student? Make sure you visit Canisteo Auto Mart. You'll find them just down the road from high prices on West Main Street in Canisteo. At Canisteo Auto Mart, they have cars. Plenty of cars. And one just for you.
And check out their new website, CanisteoAutomart.net.
And checking in now with meteorologist Gary Best. Hey, Gary, how's it look weather-wise? We're going to keep getting piles and piles of snow, you think?
Not really a lot of snow, but a lot of cold weather certainly coming up the next few days, Brian. We've got a cold front actually moving through right now, and it's going to reinforce the cold weather over the next several days coming up. But again, not too much in the way of snow, just some scattered light snow showers during today. Otherwise, mostly cloudy and breezy, and about 15 to 20. Tonight, periods of clouds will continue down to 2 to 6 degrees above zero by tomorrow morning. And tomorrow we could see some afternoon snow showers. As there might be a small accumulation in spots. Otherwise, occasional clouds and even colder than today, 12 to 16. About 2 above zero on Wednesday night. And Thursday, cold and dry, clouds and sun, high temperature about 10 to 14 degrees. Maybe some light snow for Friday. There could be some accumulation with that. And then very cold weather will likely be with us right on through the weekend, Brian.
Thanks so much, Gary.
Okay.
Newsmaker, this week we're doing kind of a neat thing. We're playing old newsmakers from the 80s and 90s and earlier 2000s. Now we get back to Dr. Savo Jevremovic and Kevin Doran.
Savo, let's talk about the economics in Europe, economic problems there. The president is going there also to London, not just Ireland. He's going to London, and his purpose there will be to have an economic summit. That's now becoming something of an annual affair. In reading about the president's trip, I noticed that many of those European countries have really astronomical unemployment levels. Example, Ireland, 20% unemployed, and it's been that way for several years. Is Europe economically in tough straits right now?
Yes, it definitely is. And you put the finger on the major problem, that is unemployment. When you look at countries like, let's say, France with about 10%, Italy about roughly the same percentage, and then you take a look at what they've had historically. See, we here in the United States are used to something like, let's say, right now, we're not complaining and we have something close to 8%. 6-7% is absolutely not a problem for us. But you're looking at countries where unemployment rates used to be until a few years ago. Now, a few years, I mean just about 3-4 years ago, something in the order of maybe 2% or less. And they're hit with the, what to them are astronomical figures. And apparently they're not finding a solution as yet.
They tend to blame us, don't they?
Well, sure. They blame the United States. They're blaming basically the very high rates of interest in the United States, which are attracting European capital to this country and therefore leaving less money over there for them to invest. I would probably agree partially that this is one of the factors, but I think there are many, many other factors which are just as important.
Well, when inflation was out of control a few years ago when Carter was president, they blamed him and the inflation rate, too, did they not?
Well, they have blamed the United States basically ever since essentially, I would say, the late 50s or early 60s.
Whether we've got high or low interest rates, we'll get blamed.
That's right. We were blamed, as you said before, because we let simply the dollar go all the way down, and in that way, American goods translated into prices in German marks, French francs, and so on were extremely low, and they wanted us to do something about strengthening the dollar. So once when they took those measures, raised the interest rates, cut our inflation down, they're blaming us again for that too.
Are they justified in that anger toward the United States?
Well, I would say that I probably could find just as many people in the United States who would argue that these high rates of interest are harming us as well, not just the Europeans. So we could, explain why they are not in the best interest of either the American economy or most of the European economies, or even, let's say, all the other countries in the world which have borrowed money here in the United States now have difficulty repaying, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and so on. But what they are facing essentially is simply the rate of growth is slowing down. It's slowing down because in France, for instance, I think the political system, the socialist government, having imposed a number of measures like shortening work weeks, increasing compulsory vacation periods, and nationalizing, of course, a number of industries, has definitely created an anti-business type of atmosphere, which is not very conducive to additional investments and therefore the expansion of the economy. I think something like this is far more important than the American level of interest rates.
So your answer to my question is that while they do have some justification in blaming us, they ought to look to themselves, too.
Sure.
Are you familiar with the problems in Ireland? I'm very curious how they got to 20% unemployment.
I don't know.
That's
an enormous it's an unbelievably high rate, yes.
And apparently it's been there for a long time, along with, this is the thing that I find mind-boggling, along with a 17 and 18% inflation rate. Yeah. Well, if you combine those two things, how does a country keep going? In fact, doesn't Israel have an inflation rate that's absolutely incredible?
It is. It's over 100% a year.
How do they stay afloat?
Well, all right. Now, you have other countries, let's say Brazil, to take an example, had that problem for years and years, or decades, I should say now. And they're using a system called indexation. In other words, what it is, it's a law that they passed, which allows and actually compels each and every contract has to be brought up to to the level of inflation. In other words, your salary automatically goes up by 10% if that month prices increase by 10%. Your debts increase by that amount, you see, as well.
So if I owed the bank, say, $20,000, they would up at 10%?
That's right.
Well, then you really are staying the same. Everyone's just moving right up.
In theory, that was the whole idea. But actually what they found out is that it just didn't work quite like that. Despite how you wrote the law and all that, certain segments in the society did not quite fare as well as others did. Essentially, people with wages did not, in Brazil, for instance, had many studies there, they did not move up as some others did.
So somebody still is going to get...
Yeah, somebody is
going to be left out.
Sure.
But the idea itself, would you think, is a sound concept?
Well, Milton Friedman, an American economist, right, a very conservative economist, has been recommending that for the United States. So if we cannot control inflation, let's go to the indexation system, and in that way we can, to a great extent, at least equalize the burden, if you want, or rather eliminate it for everybody and not just certain
But now that inflation is down to an acceptable level, that idea is being dropped.
Well, the inflation right now is running at the rate that compelled Richard Nixon back in August of 1971 to impose a price and wage freeze for 90 days and then continue with price and wage controls, if you remember.
5%?
It was, I think, not quite 5, it was around 4.5 or thereabouts. We were worried. So it shows you how we changed our mind.
One of the more humorous things I've read in recent days was a Kennedy statement of 1960 saying that President Eisenhower had allowed this country to run an inflation rate of 0.5%. It was unacceptable. Well, we would all welcome that, wouldn't we?
We most certainly would. Well, as a matter of fact, we're welcoming right now the rate that Nixon felt was excessive, and something drastic had to be done. There was a Republican president interfering with our market economy, our free enterprise economy.
Savo, we have about a minute left. Let me ask you to make your predictions of things to come. What do you predict for the nation's economy in this election year?
Well, please, we don't have another year left. It's only about roughly half a year left. And I really don't foresee that much of a change in the next 6 months. However, right after the election, I most certainly would expect interest rates to rise substantially. On the other hand, because they probably will be kept somewhat down, I think the Federal Reserve will loosen this monetary policy and inflationary rate will increase. We probably will go definitely, close to 6% or thereabouts.
But again, that's not terrible anymore.
Compared to Israel or Brazil, no, it's not.
Or even a few years ago in this country.
Compared to also a few years ago, no. Compared to a few years before that, yes, it's high.
Savo, thank you very much for being with us. Our guest again, Dr. Savo Jevremovic, Chairman of the Economics Department, Alfred University. Stay tuned for news coming up next, then the Beth Moore Show here on WLEA.
June 1st, 1984. Here's another show from the 1980s, and it's a Russian immigrant to the United States during the Reagan administration, during the height of the Cold War, by the way. This is Dr. Ed Lozansky.
Good morning. Welcome to our program. This is Kevin Doran, and this morning on our program we have Dr. Edward Lozansky of American University. We've been telling you about this for several days. Mr. Lozansky was in Russia. He got out of Russia, was finally able to get his wife out. We want to hear the whole story this morning, and then I want to talk to Professor Lozansky about his views on some current issues. Good morning, Dr. Lozansky.
Good morning.
First of all, a lot of people in our area know the story about how you got out and about how your wife got out, but then again, a lot of people don't. I wonder if you could run that story by for us.
Well, the story actually started back in 1974 when I got in trouble with the Soviet secret police, KGB. I was in trouble before with them, but just it was minor things, and now it was like major. I was teaching in Moscow at the prestigious military academy. I was teaching Soviet officers a course of nuclear physics, and because Andrei Sakharov, the famous Soviet scientist, made a lot of discoveries in this area, I often mentioned his name and spoke highly of him. And KGB didn't like that because Sakharov is dissident and he speaks out for human rights in the Soviet Union, so he's kind of a persona non grata. So I got in trouble with KGB. I was fired from all my jobs. I also was like researcher at the Institute of Atomic Energy and in a nuclear lab. So I was fired from my job because I refused to stop mentioning achievements of Andrei Sakharov. And then my wife and I decided that we have no choice but to emigrate. The problem was that my wife's father was a high senior general in the Soviet Army, and that's why he didn't want, of course, his daughter to leave the country. So apparently he suggested a plan, because I was also like nuisance to him, and I was preventing his promotion. You cannot get a promotion in the Soviet Union if you have son-in-law like me. So he offered a plan that I will leave first, and then he will get his promotion, and then my wife will join me and my daughter. We have a child. At the time she was 5. So there's great reluctance to accept this plan, but we had no other choice because in the Soviet Union I didn't work for about a year and a half, and they could put you in jail since you're a parasite. At the same time, they didn't want to give me a job. It's like a catch-22 situation. So finally my wife and I decided that I should go, and then she will join me very soon after her father will get promotion. And this very soon lasted for 6 years, because despite the fact that he did get his promotion, of course, after that he turned back on his promise, and the KGB and the Soviet Army and etc. was telling my wife that she will never leave. So we were fighting for about 6 years, and I was doing this, like I was teaching at the University of Rochester and the Nazareth College of Rochester, and also traveling all around the world campaigning for my wife, and it was very to no avail. Finally, in 1982, my wife decided that she has fed up with that, and she has no other choice but to go to the last and desperate attempt, and she and 7 other Soviet citizens in the same situation declared hunger strike. And she was in 33 days on hunger strike, and after that she almost died, and because of tremendous publicity our hunger strike got in the West, Soviets had to yield. Actually, Tatiana's father decided to resign to clear a way for her immigration, and last December, it's approximately 1 year when she arrived to Washington.
Whatever happened to the father, by the way?
He had resigned. He was chief of staff of Soviet Civil Defense. He had resigned. He lost all his privileges and is in disgrace. But I think he gained something more. He feels like he's a great human being now because he sacrificed his career and loyalty to the Communist Party to his family, which is very, very unusual to the communists. It's really unusual. And I now speak very highly on him because although 6 years he tortured us and our family, and now he finally realized what he was doing was terrible. And we correspond now. He's writing very nice letters and even says hello to me, although I am considered to be enemy of the Soviet Union. So I speak very highly on him.
You had some very important jobs in Russia. I always thought such jobs went only to Communist Party members.
Well, if you're head of the lab or, let's say, director of the institute, then you have to be a party member. Just I was a researcher and professor. No, for this kind of job, you just need brains. You don't have to necessarily be a party member.
Did it ever occur to you to become a member of the party?
Actually, I was forced many times by my father-in-law and by my officials, but I always refused because I felt that to be a member of the party, you have to be a member of the criminal gang, a mafia. So I refused.
You thought being a member of the party was like being a member of the mafia?
Exactly. I continue to think so, and my wife and I wrote a book where we prove that because we know how the Soviet elite leads, the life of Soviet elite, and because we were a member of this elite, and we wrote a book that will be published in May, and we prove that the Soviet Communist Party is actually mafia.
Our guest, Professor Edward Lozansky, a Russian who is now in this country, and his wife is here. I assume you're an American citizen by now.
Oh, yes, sure, yes.
Professor, let's talk first of all about how Americans perceive Russians and how you view that perception. In other words, when you got here, and your wife later, the Americans have an idea of what the Russian people are like and what the Soviet government is like. How accurate do you think most of us are in our perceptions?
Well, unfortunately, I have to admit that I'm in this country for like 7 years, almost 7 years, and I have to admit that whenever I talk to people, I realize that the majority, I would say 95%, are very naive about the Soviet system, and most of the people think that Soviet government and Soviet system is almost like ours. Well, they're of course a little bad, but you can talk to them like to civilized, to human beings, and usually they offer them a deal, a compromise. They'll accept this compromise, and they sometimes blame American government for being not too really forthcoming in the negotiations with the Soviet Union. I try to explain, and from my experience, and whenever I talk, I see that some people believe me, some people not, because I say such terrible things, but this is truth, and my own experience, and people don't believe that this can happen. They couldn't believe how they can keep your wife for 6 years, and because they knew this story, they believe me, of course, but they said something is wrong, maybe I did something wrong, something like, they can't believe that government like that can simply separate family, but this is only one small thing. They do much worse things. They just for expressing your opinion, they can put you in jail. With Andrei Sakharov, the great scientist, whom I try to defend right now, and actually we maybe later we'll have a chance to talk about that, about him. He's a great man, and I think he's very important for the problem of the question of peace and world peace, nuclear disarmament. If they put him in exile, he's the greatest scientist in the world. He's like Albert Einstein, and they keep him in exile. He's surrounded by KGB. People cannot get into his apartment. He's denied medical treatment in the hospital. It's terrible. They're monsters. And it's a completely different system, barbarian system. And American people, they can't believe that. They're too naive about the Soviet system.
So you think the American people are naive. How about the present American government?
Well, government is, I think they understand that perfectly. Because I'm in Washington now, and I have very good relations to some people from the White House, members of the Congress, and administration. I think they understand pretty much. But the problem with the United States is that it's democracy, and we have to rely, and you have to take into account the opinion of the public, and sometimes you have to make compromises. And frankly, I supported President Reagan's invasion into Grenada 100% because it's the only way that Russians understand of Cubans. They understand the force. Whatever negotiation, whatever you can cry. My wife cried for 6 years, and they just didn't pay any attention. Only if you're strong, if you are really dedicated to your principles of freedom, democracy, justice, then Soviets will go along with you. If you feel that you're weak, they can really push you around, they will do that. And I frankly support this administration policy towards the Soviet Union.
Are you supporting the Reagan administration? How did you feel about the Carter administration?
Unfortunately, this Carter administration was not so good because he gave Soviets some wrong signals. Sometimes he was tough with them on human rights. Next morning he said, well, I didn't mean that. And he was kind of shaky, and they didn't respect him. And they just frankly pushed him around and did what they wanted, a second invasion in Afghanistan and taking American hostages. I think all of that they did because provoked, because they felt that with Carter they can get away with it.
Well, what do you think about the peace movement in the United States? People running around wanting us to either disarm the worst elements of it, disarm unilaterally, or to enter any kind of an agreement we can get with them. What's your reaction when you see those kinds of things on TV?
Frankly, I'm writing a book on that, and there's my friend also who is from a Soviet dissident. The problem is that, again, the majority, of course, the people are very honest, and but they're very naive. They think that if you disarm, Soviets will disarm, and if we propose Soviets freeze, they will accept this freeze. This is absolute. No, I can't blame American people because they never were exposed to the totalitarian system, and they used to live in democracy. They think that all world is like that, and people are ready to make compromises. Soviets, the goal of the Soviet Union, they have to understand this, is to take its world domination. Doesn't matter, whatever tactics they can use, it's blackmail, nuclear blackmail, or disinformation, or subversion, or stealing our technology. The main goal and idea, and I know this first-hand experience because I taught in the Soviet Military Academy. I was exposed to Soviet generals, to members of the Politburo. The goal is to take over the world. Now, American people who campaign in those peace demonstrations, fine. They're very nice people. They're honest. I don't want to say they're communist agents or they're paid by KGB. This is ridiculous. But they're simply naive. And what I'm trying to do right now, I just have an agent who is trying to put me on the college circuit, and I will go around the country when my book will be published, just to tell this to American people. Listen, don't be naive. The only way you can preserve your freedom and democracy is if you'll be strong and you'll have deterrence to the Soviet blackmail.
Mr. Lozansky, let me mention another name that I know you're familiar with, Solzhenitsyn.
Right.
Solzhenitsyn came over here and said the same kinds of things you're saying, and finally announced that he wasn't going to say them anymore because everyone thought he was either A, crazy, or B, a fanatic. And he stopped saying it. Now he's writing a history of Russia. He just won't talk like you're talking now. Is the same thing going to happen to you? Are you going to get discouraged?
Well, probably Solzhenitsyn is different. Solzhenitsyn is a team.
Solzhenitsyn is what?
And his priority is not just to go around and talk, because he thinks his time is too valuable, and he's writing a book, and he makes once in a while some short speeches, but basically he thinks his fate in this world is like to be a great writer, and he's a great Russian nationalist, and for him most important is to show to the world that Russia is not Russian people are not barbarians, and they can be dealt with, which I agree with him completely. The question is that the only problem with Russian people is that they are slaves, and they want to fight with this is why one of the reasons I wanted to leave, because I felt no hope that Russian people will never rebel, and they will continue to accept the system as it is, and I wanted to be free, and my wife and I decided to leave.
Okay, you're saying the Russian people will never revolt. Then the stories we hear about the Soviet government must someday give in to the consumer demands of their own people, would you say that's nonsense?
No, probably what I say is that they can yield, let's say, to little things. Question is, maybe once in a while the government can, let's say, decrease prices or do little concessions. I'm talking about a multi-party system, about democracy, about free elections, and this I don't feel like next 100 years will happen in the Soviet Union. So unless there is one way to do that, and this is what I'm trying to convince the American government, that we, in addition to being strong militarily, we have to spend some money on education of the Soviet Union, on promoting democracy in the Soviet Union. And this can be done through the radio, through direct TV broadcast, through sending literature, and to contacts of American tourists and etc. with some people. We have to be more active on that. And I think that, let's say, one TV program to the Soviet Union, free TV program, is more important than nuclear missile, because I'm pretty sure, I hope, that those missiles will never be used. They just simply are used for deterrence. And from the Soviet side, they're used for blackmail. From the American side, they're used for deterrence. But if you really want to have peace and everlasting peace in the world, it's the only way to achieve this peace if Soviet Union will become democracy. It will be respecting human rights of the citizen and going along with international agreements. And this can be done only if they have a multi-party system, people have free expression, etc. Russian people don't know about that too much. We have to educate them from the West.
Okay, now, Professor, you taught the Russian military. We've been told by experts that the Russian military has never really rejected the idea of a nuclear war, that they think there could be a nuclear war, and they think that they could win it, and they're also working for first strike capability. Is that true?
Yes, military is right. Military, exactly. But fortunately, they still have control by the party, and as I see, at least present leadership, Andropov and his colleagues, they would like to achieve the same goal of taking over the world, but using different methods. And those methods are ideological war, subversion, destabilization of the Western society, undermining Western market and technology. This is what Andropov is trying to do, because he is not stupid. He understands that if nuclear war will start, everything will be destroyed. Some hard hats in the Soviet military, of course, saying that nuclear war is winnable, and they would like to push for that. But fortunately, they are not in power yet.
Okay, you're saying that Andropov and his colleagues are using such methods as you mentioned earlier, disinformation. Quick quickly, what do you mean by disinformation?
Well, what they simply do is they have special department in the KGB called Department of Disinformation. In addition to that, they have a department at the Communist Party called the Department of Propaganda. Now, what they do simply, well, just one of the examples, they print false documents, let's say signed by American president or by the State Department, and they circulate those documents in the third world, and those documents, let's say, indicate that the American government is going to overthrow the leader of this country. It's one thing like that. And I think they invest a lot of money in the American peace movement, in European peace movement. Although I said before, I don't believe that I believe the majority of peace movement in America people are really honest and simply not naive, but there are certain parts which is supported by KGB and which try to really use American people and American peace movement, the honest, sincere fear of nuclear war. They want to use them for Soviet purposes, to destabilize the West.
All right, there are two things. First of all, we never got to Zakharov. Our time is up. Would you come back again and talk to us about that?
Yes, certainly.
And secondly,
we have a big event coming up in May when we'll have National Andrei Sakharov Day, which is proclaimed by the Congress and President.
We do want to talk to you about that, and we'll line up an interview. The final question I have for you, and it's only going to take a few seconds to answer it. Solzhenitsyn says that essentially what we have is two materialistic, atheistic societies, one of which has a plan, and he's very pessimistic that the United States will survive. What's your view?
No, my view is very optimistic. On the contrary, I like American people. It's only a question that you have to know the truth. You have to educate, tell them the same way like Soviet people need education in democracy. American people need education about the Soviet system. And they're wonderful. I spent 7 years here. I'm so happy in this country. I know with American people we can do a lot of things. It's only a question that we need time, we need patience, and we need support from American government for this educational thing about the Soviet Union.
Right. I'm going to ask you to hold on the line, and we'll schedule another appointment with you to have you on the air. And as far as our listeners are concerned, I'll say thank you very much, Mr. Lozansky, for being with us.
Okay, you're welcome.
Hi, Ken Eisman from Country Heart, 7 Main Street, Arkport. Stop up and get gifts from the heart at Country Hearts. Glassware, tinware, anything you want. 7 Main Street, Arkport.
This is WLEA, Hornell, New York. It's 9 o'clock, and via satellite, ABC News.